Welcome back to our panel discussion, Open for Business, the State of the Government Cloud. Sponsored by Red Hat and Dell Federal here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. Our guests today are Nathan Jones, the Vice President of Federal for Red Hat, Tracy Pavillard, the Executive Director of Dell Federal, Charlie Bradley is the Technical Director for the NSA's Technology Directorate, Dave Mihelcic is Chief Technology Officer at the Defense Information Systems Agency, and Dr. Navin Vembar is Cloud Engineer and Director of the GSA IT Integrated Award Environment. And we were started to get into a discussion earlier in the webinar regarding applications, and ultimately all computing is not about infrastructure and operating systems, it's about applications. And so I want to explore further that idea of application development with a cloud orientation from the start, which also implies an open systems, an open source orientation from the start. And so, Navin, why don't we start with you on that idea?
Absolutely. One of the absolutely fascinating things that the cloud has enabled us to do is to start building in, through DevOps processes, this whole chain of events that actually takes us from, prototype, rapid development, with users, with people in the room who can actually see how this thing is going to work, with our O&M folks, to actual production, right? And
so that's kind of the agile element.
It's an agile element, and it's also that DevOps element. And what I see is as sometimes an impediment to the culture change around cloud, right? Is this idea that we should be as concerned about buying into the cloud as we are in buying a $500,000 piece of hardware, right? Because that's a capital expense that you're going to have to live with for years and years and years. But the cloud, comes in these small increments, right? We should be able to take those risks, and we should be able to show somebody something that maybe doesn't work, so we can actually go find the thing that does. And by building out using tools like the containerization tools from the beginning, right, and really architecting towards that. The capability to actually sort of execute on this whole infrastructure as code dream, right, where everything that you do is essentially a script that kicks off a process that builds your application, that pushes it to the right environment. That takes us away from having to worry about the infrastructure and the operating system, and lets us worry about what we need to worry about, which is our user, right? In the end, that's who we're here to serve.
And so for programmers, that must change their way of life a lot, because programmers program, they write code.
Yep.
But if you have 10,000 objects that you can combine into applications, that's different from classical coding, where you start with syntax and so on, and then compile later on. So what is the effect there?
Well, so what's fascinating about that, right, and this is something that we're doing at IAE and actually pushing throughout the GSA, is we're moving towards an API first way of the world, right? And that really lets us share data widely, share not just data, but business capability widely. And also it takes away the programmer in some ways to say, oh, okay, I can go and I don't have to worry about this particular problem. I don't have to resolve that problem, because I already can get access to that data and just hit a basic web service out there really simply, and boom, I've got the data I need, and I can move on. And we're really seeing the value of that, through the fact that we've opened up some of our data sets, and we're seeing them being remixed, by ourselves, by other agencies to serve their purpose, and also seeing it out in the world, seeing people selling capabilities off of that open data. And I think this is massively enabled by being able to go to the cloud, right? Because at that point, you can, if something becomes popular, you can increase its profile without having to, build out new hardware, build out new capabilities around it. So I think it becomes a very much more open and connected world.
All right, and Dave, you were nodding your head in assurance on this. How does DISA look at the whole application development space in the cloud on the OpenStack?
So if we're going to take advantage of the benefits of the cloud, whether it be on an OpenStack or a proprietary stack or a commercial cloud, it really doesn't matter. We have to adopt modern techniques in development, testing, and deployment. So DevOps, a broad term that covers a lot of this. We've made the move to Agile for some of our major programs, but still we haven't been able to sort of cross the DevOps threshold, if you will. A lot of it has to do with our requirements for testing and certification and accreditation, security certification and accreditation. A lot of that is actually still manually driven, and we're trying to push the boundaries of that so we can automate much of the testing, especially conformance and performance testing, as well as security conformance. And instead of having to have a group of penetration testers write a report, we should be able to automate what they're doing as part of a DevOps process, and assuming that the software passes the test in an automated fashion, push directly to production. A great example of that is something we're doing for our Cyber Situational Awareness Analytic Cloud, CSAC, where we're putting up a developer environment where they can build their software against an operationally realistic version of CSAC with operationally representative data, build new analytics, compile those, and test them in real time with resources being turned up and down in a commercial cloud, a government cloud that's being provided through one of the many government cloud providers, so that we don't have to reserve capacity in the development environment. So we're not going to quite get there in terms of just being able to push that code directly to the production environment in an automated fashion, primarily because we actually run this analytic cloud at multiple levels, including classified levels. So it isn't as easy to automate that push of code. But the goal would be to reduce that amount of time from the time a developer, working with an operator, decides on what an analytic should do, developing that analytic, demonstrating it to the operator, and then pushing it to production. We'd like to reduce that time to minutes rather than days, weeks, months.
Yeah, but the
years.
process still requires much more rigor at the DISA level than, say, developing an app.
But you
for
can
the App
automate
Store.
that rigor, and this is a discussion I've had with many of the folks who own this process today. If you can define the process, I can automate that process, and when I can automate that process, I can do it better than you could do it in a manual fashion.
Okay, and Charlie, what about the National Security Agency? I mean, people don't often think of it as much as probably they should as a development organization, but lots of applications there. What's the approach with respect to cloud and orientation toward open source?
Huge leverage of open source. We discussed earlier, a lot of our foundation is built on open source. More and more our developers internally not only leveraging open source or contributing back to the open source community. There's reference made to Hadoop. There's some enhancements that our agency made to that and contributed back in the form of Accumulo. I think those are just some examples. But again, for us, about mission agility, you can't emphasize that enough, and that's really one of the benefits that we're seeing, and we hope to get more of as a service provider for the IC. That what this really offers the IC, I think, is ability to have persistent collaboration across multiple agencies and really improve the intelligence products at the end of the day. So for us locally, we're kind of fortunate as far as most agencies and most other parts of the government. We have a lot of really talented, and I would say some of the most talented developers in the entire nation working for us. Again, they're huge believers in open source.
But it also sounds like you need to have some of the mission and program owners involved in this process. It's not something. That's simply
absolutely.
A
I mean,
development,
this is a journey. It's not flip the switch and all this is going to happen overnight. This is a journey. DevOps, those types of constructs, the agile development constructs, are more and more part of the culture of the development organization.
Interesting. Well, a lot of fervor about this, Nathan from Red Hat. So, what do vendors have to do that are providing the supporting elements here have to do to make sure that they are agile enough to support this kind of new thinking that the government seems to be pretty much imbued with across the agencies?
Yeah. So, DevOps is about flexibility and agility. What we see customers doing is decoupling the apps layer from that infrastructure layer in order to take advantage of that even faster. There's a couple benefits to that, being really the ability to onboard to a cloud faster, but also an important consideration that we help customers with is the ability to exit that cloud faster and to have that freedom, right? So that they can move infrastructure environments. And platform as a service, which several of the agencies that are here on the panel with me are exploring, is a way to do that. So if you look at PaaS and Red Hat's OpenShift product as an example of that, we look to help decouple the application from the infrastructure layer. And if a customer can do that, they can now give the developer more tools, give them tools faster, give them more flexibility, but also create an environment that can be moved from one cloud environment to another. So if you're moving from a traditional virtualization environment to bare metal or to one of the many public cloud providers, you have that consistency. So the decoupling of that apps from the infrastructure is just as important or more important in the cloud than even in the physical environment. So we see customers doing that a lot, again, with PaaS being a vehicle to get that done.
So first you pick the diamond, then you pick the setting, but they don't have to be the same one every time. I guess probably there's another element that you could probably mention, and that is also decoupling the data from the application.
Sure.
And I guess the hardware.
Yeah, I think customers are looking at a lot of strategies, and when you look at something like OpenStack in a private cloud sitting underneath that platform as a service, then you start to look at the ability to use different data strategies. So I think, again, it's modularity and flexibility is what both the ops folks want in the data center, whether that be cloud or public or private, and then the developers want that flexibility. So how do you combine the two? How do you give them multiple options for data, multiple options for development languages and environments, and the ability to move as demands change and requirements change?
Interesting. Tracy, something to add?
Yeah, while Dell is not a traditional application development company, one thing that we can offer our government and commercial customers is we've built 28 solution centers around the world that customers can bring applications in to test and do proof of concepts on across multiple hardware platforms, multiple technologies, without having to actually make the investment or go sign up with a traditional cloud provider to get that done. So just wanted to make that available.
Okay, and Dave, I wanted to ask you too about something that Nathan said, and that the whole idea of this decoupling, and then something Charlie mentioned, which was persistent collaboration. So DISA must get this question. You want that consistent collaboration across multiple agencies, especially in the IC, but also in DoD too, which ultimately they all impinge, because then Homeland Security has an impingement on all of this at some point too. But not all of the data might be available to all of the applications and all of the users. And so there's that element of rights and who can see it and read, write, and all of that has to be built in. How does that all work in the open source context?
So once again, I don't think it's an open source versus proprietary question. You certainly need an identity and access management strategy. In the Department of Defense, we base everything on issuing a PKI credential to authorized users, and we use that PKI credential for initial login to the Edge workstation, as well as to authenticate yourself to a service running in the cloud. And then based on that PKI credential, as well as the attributes associated with the person, right? You authenticate yourself with the PKI, and then we have a database of attributes about you as a person, your clearance, for example. Access control decisions can be made. And we have a longstanding partnership with DMDC. They provide the basic authentication, Defense Manpower Data Center. DMDC provides the basic authentication, the basic identity information, all the employees of the Department of Defense, military, civilian, and contractor. We, in partnership with NSA, provide a PKI infrastructure to authenticate all of those users, and then we expose services that can be consumed by applications in the Department of Defense network so that they can authenticate users and then assign access rights to them.
I think what's fascinating, right, going off that, right, the idea that we have to secure our data, and we actually need to provide that access. And for us, PKI and CAC cards, things like that are really key. We're also looking at things like Connect.gov, right? That starts spreading out that ability and decentralizing that ability to actually create identity. And sometimes it's not identity for government employees, right? But it's identity for citizens as well. So as they start using services from all these federal agencies, that's a unified view of the world. That is, again, driven by the sort of architecture of this decentralized cloud capability.
So in many ways, users then cease to be so much entries in Active Directory as maybe they are objects, each person and their identity and their rights. Charlie, is that something you're kind of thinking about?
Yeah, so I think just to add to that, two of the foundational components in our approach to the cloud architecture have been the identity and access management, but also this notion of labeling data. Being able, it's a very powerful construct, because being able to say, here's data, here's something about it, where it came from, how it was gathered, it allows you to be able to say, who can see this? You have to match all these together. If you can't match the two together, you don't get to see anything.
So that sounds
from
like
a security standpoint, as well as an effectiveness to the mission, get to see the relevant information, not everything, and having to sort it out.
And Dave, that sounds like that tagging and metadata tagging and rights assignment, that sounds like a very ripe area for automating, as you mentioned earlier.
So
you've got to get some of
absolutely.
that stuff onto the orchestration way.
The more we can automate the process of tagging the data, the more secure the process is going to be. And also, the more rapid fashion we can give authorized users access to the information, because the last thing they want to do is make a phone call and fill out a form to request access to data when they need it now for a mission requirement.
All right, so on that note, we will take a short break. Our guests today are Dave Mihelcic, Chief Technology Officer at the Defense Information Systems Agency, Dr. Navin Vembar, Cloud Engineer and Director of the GSA IT Integrated Award Environment, Nathan Jones, the Vice President of Federal for Red Hat, and Tracy Pavillard, Executive Director for Dell Federal, and Charlie Bradley, Technical Director for the NSA's Technology Directorate. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. This is Open for Business, the State of Government Cloud, sponsored by Red Hat and Dell Federal, here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.